4 years, if we continue down this track, could be an eye-watering £30 to £40 billion. That is double the annual police budget for England and Wales. Mr. Speaker, this newly elected government is not prepared to let this chaos continue. Yeah. So let me turn to the action we are urgently taking to restore some grip to the system, to tackle the chaos and to get costs down. First, I have informed the Rwandan government we will be ending the Migration and Economic Development Partnership. We will save £220 million on further direct payments to Rwanda over the next few years, and we will immediately save up to £750 million that had been put aside by the previous government to cover the MEDP this year. Second, we will invest some of the saved money from the Migration Partnership into a new Border Security Command instead. It will bring together the work of the Border Force, the National Crime Agency, the Small Boats Operational Command, intelligence and security officers. The recruitment has begun for a new commander, and we will put in place additional cross-border officers, investigators, prosecutors, intelligence and security officers, with new counter-terror-style powers against organised immigration crime announced in the King's speech last week. We're immediately increasing UK officers' involvement in Europol and the European Migrant Smuggling Centre. And third, we will replace the Rwanda Migration Partnership with a serious returns and enforcement programme. We have immediately replaced the flight planning for Rwanda with actual flights to return people who have no right to stay to their home countries instead. We're immediately redeploying Home Office staff away from the failed Rwanda partnership and into returns and enforcement to reverse the collapse in removals that has taken place since 2010. And I have tasked the Immigration Enforcement Team with intensifying enforcement activity this summer, targeting illegal working across high-risk sectors. Fourth, we will end the asylum chaos and start taking asylum decisions again so we can clear the backlog and end asylum hotels. The new Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill announced in the King's speech will bring in new replacement arrangements, including fast-track decisions and returns to safe countries. But in the meantime, I am laying a statutory instrument which ends the retrospective nature of the Illegal Migration Act provisions so that the Home Office can immediately start clearing cases from after March 2023. Mr. Speaker, making this one simple change will save the taxpayer an estimated £7 billion over the next 10 years. And fifth, as the Prime Minister has just set out, we will work closely with our European neighbours to tackle the upstream causes of migration, including through the Rome process. Mr. Speaker, this country will always do our bit alongside others to help those fleeing war and persecution. But we need a proper system where rules are enforced. There are no quick fixes to the chaos created over the last 14 years, and it will take time to clear the asylum backlog, to bring costs down, to get new enforcement in place, to strengthen our borders and prevent dangerous boat crossings. But there is no alternative to serious, hard graft. We cannot waste any more time or money on gimmicks. The country voted for change, and that means it is time for a sensible and serious plan. I commend this statement to the House.
Just say a very important statement, and it ran over slightly, so I'm more than happy for the front bench spokespersons also to run over if need be. Shadow Home Secretary James Cleverly.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and I welcome you back to your place, my first opportunity to do so. In my time both as Home Secretary and indeed before that as Foreign Secretary, you were very kind to me, my minor indiscretions at the dispatch box, late deployment of statements and slight overrunnings. As you know, you've also been very, very kind to my family in sometimes quite trying circumstances, and I very much appreciate that. I also want to take this opportunity to congratulate the Right Honourable Lady on her appointment as Home Secretary. It is a challenging but incredibly rewarding job, and I genuinely, because the security of this nation is now very much in the hands of her and her ministers, I genuinely wish her all the success in everything she is looking to do. And I know she inherits in the Home Office a dedicated team of civil servants who will help her keep the country safe and secure. They did that to me when I was in her position. I'd also like to take this opportunity, of course, it's disorderly to recognise their presence, but if I were to wave my hand vaguely in this direction, I might also take the opportunity to thank my previous private office civil servants. It says here, I want to thank the Home Secretary and her team for advanced sight of the statement. I just put a line through that. The Labour Party and indeed the Home Secretary in her statement like to talk tough on border security, but today's statement, despite all the hyperbole and the made-up numbers, is basically an admission of what we knew all along, is that the Labour Party have scrapped the Rwanda partnership on ideological grounds, removed a deterrent which the National Crime Agency said that we needed, and the level of discourtesy directed towards the people and government of Rwanda is quite breathtaking. To have them read about this decision in the papers before anyone from government had the good grace to formally notify them, I think is an error, and no one in this House believes for a moment that that level of discourtesy would have happened had this partnership been with a European country. Labour has given an effective amnesty to thousands of asylum seekers who are banned under Conservative plans. And Labour's plans amount to doing less than we were doing when we were in government and merely changing the signs above a few desks at the Home Office with their so-called border command and their returns unit. Before the election, the Right Honourable Lady said that she would create a returns unit. Now, the narrative is that she is going to redeploy some staff, not increase the number of staff, redeploy some staff, showing that the returns function already exists. And the fact there is now no safe third country to return people to who cannot be returned home means that we ask, where is she going to send the people who come here from countries like Afghanistan or Iran, in Syria? Has she started negotiations on returns agreements with the Taliban or the Ayatollahs of Iran or Assad in Syria? And if she's not going to send anyone that arrives here on small boats to Rwanda, which local authorities will she be sending people to? We were closing hotels when I was in government, and I wonder which local authorities will be receiving those asylum seekers. If not Rwanda, will it be Rochdale or Romford or Richmond? And most importantly, can the Right Honourable Lady now confirm that if you arrive here illegally in a small boat, you will be able to claim asylum? And finally, will she confirm how long after she briefed the media that she was scrapping the partnership with Rwanda did she have the courtesy to speak directly with the Rwandan government? And it is because we now have no deterrent that nobody wants to take on the role of the head of her new so-called border command. Neil Basu, former senior police officer, a man who I have huge respect for, was Labour's #1 choice. He's ruled himself out. And we now learn that General Stuart Skeets, again, a very highly respected former British Army general who was in large part responsible for delivering the Albania deal, which cut small boat arrivals by 90% from that country, has resigned from his position as Director of Strategic Operations. To misquote Oscar Wilde, to lose one border commander could be seen as a misfortune. To lose two looks like carelessness, perhaps even incompetence. I also notice, and it's available online for those who are thinking of applying, that the new job advert for Labour's Border Security Command is located not in Kent, where the channel is, but is flexible from Belfast, Bristol, Cardiff, Durham, Glasgow, Liverpool or Manchester, none of which, the last time I checked, are anywhere near the English Channel. The reality is, everybody knows, including the people smugglers, that the small boat problem is going to get worse, indeed has already got worse under Labour because they have no deterrent. People are being sold a lie when they are being smuggled into this country across the busiest shipping lanes. And we do need to stop them. Too many lives have already been lost. Sadly, 6 more have been lost in the Channel in the last few weeks, and our hearts go out to them and their loved ones. We disagree on many things, but we can agree that we need to put an end to this evil trade. But sadly, the initial decisions that her government has made this problem worse and not better.
Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the words that the Shadow Home Secretary gave about the dedication of the Home Office officials and also the importance of work on national security. As he will know, when I was in the shadows, I always worked with him and supported him around national security issues. I know he will do the same as well, and I welcome him to his shadow post as well. I presume this was the first of the Conservative leadership speeches, contest speeches that we have heard today. Let us respond to some of the things that the Shadow Home Secretary has said. Look, you realise, let's all be very clear, what it is we have inherited from him and from his party. We've had the highest level of spring crossings ever. That is what has happened under his party. We've had gangs left to wreak havoc, not just along the French coast, but across our border, through our country, and back through Europe as well. We've got asylum supports, costs set to rise to £30 to £40 billion over the next 4 years as a result of his decisions and his party. And as for this idea about deterrent, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry, 4 volunteers being sent to Rwanda isn't a deterrent to anyone for anything at all. And the idea that he would spend £10 billion on this fantasy, this fiction, this gimmick, rather than ever do the hard graft. Actually, £700 million has already been spent on sending just 4 volunteers in 2.5 years. Now, we had often warned that it would frankly be cheaper to put them up in the Paris Ritz. Frankly, it turns out, it would actually be cheaper to buy the Paris Ritz. And as for the amnesties, I don't know if he has ever understood the Illegal Migration Act that he voted for and then he inherited from his predecessors, because when he asks what happens to people who arrive illegally and can they claim asylum, that is exactly what happens under Section 9 of his Illegal Migration Act. They can all claim asylum and they can all enter the asylum system and will be entitled to asylum support. That is what happens. That is the system that he's been presiding over and running since he became Home Secretary. That is the system that we have now inherited. The problem is, people enter the asylum system and they never ever leave. He didn't even bring in the operational arrangements to try and properly take decisions, and his Home Office effectively stopped taking the majority of asylum decisions in May. Maybe he didn't even know, but that is what's happened in his Home Office. Mr. Speaker, this party and this government doesn't believe in amnesties. We think the rules need to be respected and enforced. His party is the one who has actually given an effective amnesty to people who can stay in the asylum system forever. We believe the rules should be enforced. The problem is, actually, that is what the Shadow Home Secretary believes too. I don't think he believes any of the stuff that he said. He's only saying it for his Tory leadership contest. He's just too weak to tell his party the truth. He thought the whole policy on Rwanda was batshit, and then he went out to bat for it. It's just not serious.
I bet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend to her place and thank her for her statement. I think we all suspected that policy in the Home Office under the last government was a bit of a mess. I don't think we realised how much of an expensive mess it was till she's provided that in her statement. Just ask the Home Secretary about the attraction for people coming here illegally to work in the black economy. If there are suspicions, then you have to go to HMRC, the Gang Masters Authority, UK Visas and the police to get action to deal with those activities. I note that the Home Secretary is looking to try and combine them now to deal with illegal working in the car washing sector. Is that going to be a systematic change of approach, and is it going to be applied to other sectors as well? I think it's very welcome if it is.
Well, my honourable friend is right. We have to tackle the illegal working and also the exploitation that can often drive a lot of what happens, and that is why we are intensifying the immigration enforcement, part of our new huge expansion in reforms, in returns and enforcement unit as part of our plans. But he is right that the process also needs to be simplified because it has become too complicated and too bureaucratic actually to just make sure that the rules are being enforced. We have set out high-risk sectors that we want to focus on this summer, but we need a more systematic approach. We have talked about a single enforcement approach, and we will set out more details about those plans.
We now come to Lib Dem spokesperson Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the year 2018, the number of small boat arrivals stood at 299. In the year 2023, last year, the number was over 29,000. What happened in those intervening 5 years? One thing that happened in those intervening 5 years was the closure of the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme. The Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme was introduced by the coalition government in 2014 and was designed to select some of the most vulnerable people from refugee camps in Jordan near Syria. And what we've seen since the closure of that scheme is people choosing instead to make for these shores rather than applying in refugee camps. So, will she rule out the offshore processing of asylum seekers? Or will she consider introducing a scheme similar to the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme that could serve to incentivise asylum seekers applying for asylum close to the war zones that are afflicting them?
Can I welcome the honourable member to his post speaking on these issues. He's right to talk about the importance of the UK doing its bit to help those who have fled persecution and conflict. It's why I strongly believe that the Homes for Ukraine programme was immensely important. It's been important personally to our family. It's why I think it's been so important that the UK has done its bit in previous years as well, including around Hong Kong and Afghanistan as well. And that must continue to be the case. It has to be alongside a properly functioning system, though. Otherwise, criminal gangs will continue to exploit whatever the system is, and at the moment, those criminal gangs are getting away with it. On the specific issue around offshore processing, in fact, the Vulnerable Person Scheme was a form of offshore processing, just as the Homes for Ukraine scheme was. So I think there are different ways of having arrangements in place, and our approach is to always look at what works. So long as it meets proper standards in terms of international law, we should be serious about what it is that works in order to tackle the complex problems that we face.
Julie Reid.
My right honourable friend for her statement. I think that my constituents will be incredulous when they're informed of the extent to which the previous government has wasted so much money on this scheme. What commitments can you give the House that for any further programmes and the money that will be spent, that we'll be able to rescind our commitment on those and that no further public money will be wasted?
Well, my honourable friend makes a really important point, and I welcome her to Parliament as well as to asking questions on this issue. We have to have a really strong and rigorous and robust approach to value for money. And that has to be in every department. That cannot simply be the responsibility of the Treasury. It has to be the responsibility of the Home Office, responsibility of every government department. That is the approach that this Labour government will take. I am frankly shocked that not just the Home Office, but actually also the Treasury, the Prime Minister, Cabinet colleagues under the last government all signed off these incredibly high payments and costs. They must have had the modelling that would tell them how much these costs would go up by, and yet they signed it off. Our government is determined to pursue value for money at every stage.
Kit Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If numbers of small boat crossings next summer are higher than this summer, will she resign?
I realise the honourable member is keen to get rid of me before I've even just stood up at the dispatch box. Unfortunately, I think we have seen a succession of Conservative Home Secretaries who, 8 I think we have had in the last 8 years, none of whom resigned, 2 of whom were sacked. Actually, that was 2 of the same person who were in fact sacked under the last government. Look, we have to be serious about this. We have to be serious about this because the dangerous boat crossings are undermining border security and they are putting lives at risk. Nobody should be making those journeys, and we have to work not just here but also across other European countries as well to stop boats before they reach the French coast in the first place and to make sure that lives can be saved and that the gangs are actually accountable for their terrible crimes.
Josh Simons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement on the shocking figures that are symbolic of the failure of the members opposite to restore control over our borders. I note that despite this spending of taxpayer cash, removals of failed asylum seekers collapsed and foreign national offenders collapsed under the Conservatives. Can I ask the Home Secretary what the Home Office is doing to ensure that those who've no right to be in the UK are swiftly removed and the rules are properly enforced?
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point. I also welcome him to his seat in Parliament as well. He is right that the removals of failed asylum seekers have fallen by a third since 2010. The removals of foreign national offenders have fallen by a quarter. That is not good enough. It means the rules are not being respected, the rules are not being enforced. And it's why we will set up a new returns and enforcement programme. We have committed to 1,000 additional staff to be working on returns and enforcement to make sure that the rules are in fact respected, to make sure that not only where we have return agreements in place but also looking at individual cases as well to make sure that we can have a system that people have confidence in. There is a lot of chaos to tackle, but we are determined to do it.
Pete Wishart.
Speaker, the Home Secretary is absolutely right to lay it into the Conservatives for their shambles of an immigration policy that will define them in years to come. But all I'm hearing from the Home Secretary is being harder on asylum seekers. Enforcement seems to be the priority of this Home Secretary now. Where are we hearing about the safe and legal routes that asylum seekers have access to come to this country? And will she stop the dehumanising and scapegoating language? And will she pledge to take no quarter from the belligerents behind me?
I thank the honourable member for his question. I think, as I responded to the Liberal Democrats, making sure that the UK always does its bit to help those who have fled persecution is really important. And we have done so through different programmes in the past. We had the Syrian Families programme back in 2015, which was also important. But we also have to make sure that the system works, that it has credibility and that the rules are enforced. And too often the rules aren't enforced at the moment, and they need to be so that everyone can respect the system. And also too often we have criminal gangs who are just causing havoc, who are able to undermine border security and who are also making huge profits. It's become a criminal industry along our border, and that is deeply damaging. I do agree with him that this cannot be about rhetoric, and nobody should be just ramping up the rhetoric, especially when it's alongside just gimmicks that don't work. What we've got to do is be serious. We've got to be serious about this and actually put in place sensible plans that work.
Mike Amesbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I welcome the Home Secretary, the Labour Home Secretary, to her place. We've inherited an almighty mess with asylum accommodation costing £8 million per day. It's absolute chaos. And it seems that, according to the Sunday Times, there's even middlemen and middlewomen taking advantage and profiteering through this system. How is the Home Secretary going to get a grip of this chaos that we've inherited from the previous Tory government?
My honourable friend raises an important question because, as well as failing to tackle the criminal gangs taking hold along the Channel, There's also been too much of a focus on gimmicks and also a failure to have practical planning in place. So the failure, for example, to make sure that they had proper long-term contracts around asylum accommodation, and instead, when we had the chaos at Manston a couple of years ago, that then led to last-minute hotel procurement, completely inappropriate accommodation, and also costing a fortune as well. So we have to tackle that, and that is why we have set out plans. We're determined to make sure that we can get that backlog down and also end asylum hotel use. As a result of the chaos with the Illegal Migration Act and the fact that the Home Office has stopped taking decisions, that will now take time. That is going to be difficult to take time to sort that out, but that's why the statutory instrument that we're laying today is so important. That alone should save the taxpayer £7 billion.
Dr. Keir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the Labour Party managed to go an entire election campaign without answering this question, and that the Home Secretary failed to answer it again when asked by the Shadow Home Secretary, so I'll give it one more try. Where does the Home Secretary intend to send failed asylum seekers from Afghanistan, Syria and Iran?
Again, I'll just say to the honourable member, he obviously doesn't understand the system that his party and his government put in place. All the people who are in the asylum system, they're staying there. So they're staying currently under his policies. For those individuals are now being sent all around the country into asylum hotels all over the country. That is the system that they have left us with. We don't think that is the right thing to do. We think that asylum decisions should be taken on a case-by-case basis. That is the right thing to do, and also that we should make sure that we have proper returns agreements, and to do what his party should have been doing under his own policies for the 60% of people who continued to be entitled to asylum decisions but weren't actually getting them under his Illegal Migration Act. So what we will do is run the asylum system effectively, like actually his system should have been doing.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend for the forensic work that she's been doing in her department. Could I ask her what consideration she has given for a humanitarian visa for people in Gaza to be reunited with their family if they're studying in the UK or working in our NHS? My constituent has his wife and 2 little children in Gaza at the moment. He can't return home, and yet the last government refused to make provision for them to come and be reunited with him in the UK.
Well, my honourable friend will know that there are obviously long-standing arrangements for family reunion for refugees, and obviously there are also different concerns that have been raised around Gaza, because there's a real importance for people being able to return to their homes as well in the Middle East too. But if she has an individual case that she would like to raise with my right honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, then she's very welcome to do so.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, when I was in the migrant camps in northern France last year, the migrants told me and some of my colleagues that one of the deterrents that would stop them coming is if they were turned back in the Channel or sent back the same day. Now, we saw the Border Force Agency take a boatload back just last week. So will the Home Secretary now, with that advice, grow a political backbone and order the Border Force to send the boats back the same day?
Well, the honourable member refers to the case where there was an incident in the Channel and where there was cooperation between the Border Force and between the French authorities that did also involve returning people to the French coast. That operational cooperation, I think, is really important. But I would just say to him, cooperation is the really important word here, because if we want to prevent gangs operating and organising, if we want to prevent boats reaching the French coast in the first place, we have to work closely not just with France, but with Germany, with other European countries, with the countries through which some of the supply chains are operating as well. And it's that cooperation that I know quite often he and some of the others in his party have refused. So that cooperation will be important, and it's our best way to stop the criminal gangs.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you,
Very much, Mr. Speaker. In just a few short days, my right honourable friend has simultaneously saved the taxpayer a tremendous amount of money and got more people in the Home Office working on getting this system sorted than we have had in the years that have gone before. So I kind of congratulate her for that. Does she agree with me that it's entirely in keeping with Labour values to ensure that there's safe refuge for those fleeing a war zone, and at the same time to ensure that those who aren't entitled to be here are repatriated and save the UK taxpayers' money?
Well, my honourable friend is right. There are just some principles here about doing our bit to help those who fled persecution, but also making sure that those who have not, the rules are enforced, and that people who don't have a right to be here should be swiftly returned. So at the moment, none of those things apply. None of those things are working properly, and that's why we have to restore order to the asylum system so that we can go back to some of the principles that, if you go back many years, the UK has always stood for.
Colin Denyer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a huge relief that the vile Rwanda scheme has been scrapped, and I've listened very carefully to the Home Secretary's statement. Now, given that 94% of people seeking asylum in this country are ready and eager to work to support themselves, and given that freezing them out of work leaves them in destitution, but also means that the UK misses out on tax revenue from their work and misses out on much-needed specialists and professionals like the nurse I met in an asylum seeker project in Bristol recently, will the Home Secretary take the UNHCR's advice and urgently lift the ban that stops asylum seekers from working?
No, I don't believe that that is the right approach, because what we need to do is to make swift decisions and make sure that the rules are properly respected and enforced. I am concerned about employers who exploit those who have arrived, sometimes as a result of criminal gangs, sometimes as a result of trafficking, sometimes as a result of smuggling. I don't believe that employers should be able to exploit those kinds of routes and journeys. Once, if people have fled persecution, if they are granted asylum in this country, then of course they should be able to work and be able to work swiftly. But if they are not entitled to be here, if they have not fled persecution, if they should be turned down and returned to their home country, then they should not be able to work in the UK.
Mike Tapp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Dover and Deal take this very seriously, being at the very front line of this issue after the Conservatives have left us with open borders. My right honourable friend, thank you for dealing with this with such seriousness. How long will it take for the Border Security Commander to be in place? And when they are, what sort of impact will they have in assisting law enforcement?
So can I thank my honourable friend, welcome to him to his position, and as the honourable member for Dover, I know his constituency has faced some of the real pressures as a result of the criminal gangs and the small boat crossings. I thank him for his work, and I know also his experience in tackling some of these issues, and he knows very well the work of the National Crime Agency, for example, in tackling these criminal gangs. The Border Security Command, we are putting in place the steps for the Border Security Command straight away. So we have already begun the recruitment, not just for the new commander, but also for additional staff, for hundreds of additional cross-border police, security and intelligence officers and specialist investigators and prosecutors. That work will start straight away. We have already immediately increased the UK presence in Europol and also in the European Migrant Smuggling Centre as well, so that we can get on with that work, building those partnerships and taking that action.
Greg Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Home Secretary agrees with me that it is a moral issue in terms of we must never again see people dying in the Channel. But does she agree with me that deterrent must be a part of the panoply that we put forward? So I'm not clear, what deterrent measures is the Home Secretary going to put in place? And because this question has been failed to be answered a number of times, what will happen to failed asylum seekers from countries like Syria, Iran and Afghanistan?
So the honourable member, I agree with him that it is just devastating that lives are being lost, including children. And we've seen increasing violence from some of the gangs crowding more people onto these overcrowded boats where a little 7-year-old girl ended up losing her life. But he talks about the issue about deterrence. The problem with the Rwanda scheme is it's clearly not a deterrent at all. 4 people being sent over 2.5 years, that is not a deterrent at all. The issue then is at the moment as well, there are no deterrents for any of the criminal gangs at all. They can just operate with impunity. So you have to start by making sure that the criminal gangs actually can face justice, that there is actually the action on the supply chains earlier on, and make sure that we have consequences and that there is a deterrent there. I would also say that the problem is, I think, when you have a system where people can arrive in the UK and stay in the asylum accommodation system forever, which is the Illegal Migration Act that his party voted for, that also actually means there is no disincentive for anyone, because actually it makes it very easy for people, even if they have no right to be here, to be able to stay indefinitely, to be able to work illegally, and that goes against the rules and means the system is just not working.
Adam Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Home Secretary for her statement today, which I think contains some really quite revelatory points on the state of finances. Now, Sandy Acre in my constituency is home, and long has been home, to 2 of the asylum hotels, one of which I was very pleased to see recently closed. But the Best Western Hotel remains open, and this is a huge cost to people in my constituency and across the nation, and indeed leaves asylum seekers caught in an endless and inescapable limbo that they cannot get out of. What steps will the Home Secretary be taking to make sure that we can close asylum hotels once and for all?
Well, my honourable friend makes a really important point, and we need to clear the backlog, not just let the backlog grow and grow and grow, which is what the Conservatives were doing, but actually to end up clearing the backlog so that as a result of that we can end asylum hotels, which are inappropriate and extremely costly. I am concerned that, having discovered that the Home Office had effectively stopped taking the majority of asylum decisions under the Shadow Home Secretary, who doesn't seem to actually know what his own department was doing as a result of his own policies, as a result, that will now take longer to do, but it remains an immensely important thing that we have to do. The other thing we will have to do is to tackle the backlog that they had allowed to grow in the appeals process as well, which is also slowing the system down.
Brian Matthew.
Mr. Speaker, congratulations to the Home Secretary on her appointment and also on her statement to the House. Will asylum seekers, and this is following on, but perhaps with a nuance, will asylum seekers, perhaps after initial registration, be allowed to work and pay taxes while their applications are pending? Thank you.
Well, I think that if people have a right to be in the UK, so if they have fled persecution and have been granted refugee status, if they have come to be here on a visa through the normal processes, then of course we have people contributing to our country and have done so for generations. But I do also think that if people are not here lawfully, who have not fled persecution and actually should fail the asylum system process and be returned, then they should not be working in the UK. So I think this is simply about having a swift system so you can make decisions quickly and make sure that the rules are enforced.
Anna Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm delighted to see my right honourable friend in her place on the government benches. I'm proud that Bradford is a city of sanctuary and of organisations like Bevan Health, set up by a GP in my constituency, that works to deliver healthcare, vital healthcare, to asylum seekers who are awaiting decisions, sometimes over 12 months in many cases, in hotels. So can my right honourable friend provide assurance that asylum seekers will continue to have access to essential healthcare as our government works to clear the asylum backlog, so in future fewer people will be left languishing in hotels? Thank you.
Well, Manfred is right that it's really important that we do try and swiftly clear the backlog as rapidly as possible. It does include some people who are very vulnerable and who may be in need of support. It also includes people who shouldn't be in the UK, and the system should work to operate fairly so they are swiftly returned. But we have to actually get back to decision making. You know, I thought I would be coming to this dispatch box and saying, well, what we want to do is we want to speed up decision-making, we want to accelerate decision-making. I didn't think I would be standing at this dispatch box saying, no, we've got to just restart asylum decision-making in the first place because they've just stopped it. I mean, that I really had not expected. I mean, it really is far more shocking than I had imagined, and I really thought I had a good imagination.
Richard Trice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When you take a drug dealer off the street corner, guess what? Another one appears because of the vile drugs trade and the amount of money involved. My constituents of Boston and Skegness believe it's exactly the same with trying your policy, Home Secretary, of smashing the gangs. If you smash one gang, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. Another one appear, and another one will appear, because there is so much money involved. Here's the point. How long will you give your policy, Home Secretary, before realising that the only policy will work is the policy that you actually started last week, which is to pick up and take back to France, which we're entitled to do under international maritime law? It will help British citizens, it will help the British taxpayers, and it will help the French, and it will reduce the magnet factor.
Well, what I would say to the honourable member is that no one should be making these dangerous journeys, and the criminal gangs are making massive profits from organising these boats. I just don't think they should be able to get away with it, and they are at the moment. We should be taking action against those criminal gangs, and I simply don't accept that it's impossible to go after the criminal gangs to make sure that you take action not just on the gangs themselves, but also on their supply chains, on the routes in which the boats that are taking, on their finances, and that we properly, substantially increase the law enforcement resources. As honourable members will know, we have had cases where journalists have identified smugglers and those responsible for being involved in some of the smuggler gangs. I think that those smuggler gang members should be facing law enforcement. We have to do this. It's essential that we do. This is about properly standing up for the rule of law, as well as making sure that we do everything we can to prevent these dangerous small boats.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to see the Home Secretary take her place. My constituents in Aylesbury have two concerns. First, that we re-establish control of our borders. Second, that we remember the need for compassion for vulnerable people fleeing conflict and persecution. On that point, will the Home Secretary commit to ensuring there are resettlement routes for people fleeing desperate and dangerous circumstances? And what will she do to ensure that they are viable? Thank you.
I think the my honourable friend is right to welcome her to her place in this House. That what I think people have always wanted in this country is that combination to have strong border security and to have a proper, fair system. So we do our bit to help those who have fled persecution alongside other countries, but also so the rules are enforced and those who don't have a right to be here should be returned. She will know that, for example, there are a series of different resettlement routes or different forms of support. For example, the Homes for Ukraine scheme, which does continue, and also some of the Afghan resettlement schemes. We are concerned about the operation of some of the Afghan schemes, and we are looking at that further to make sure that they are functioning properly.
Jerry Corbyn.
Speaker, I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. The tragedy of desperate people dying in the Channel is compounded by desperate people dying in the Mediterranean and in the Aegean, as human beings fleeing from all kinds of horrible situations try to seek a place of safety. Is she cooperating with other European countries on a safe route for asylum seekers? Is she prepared to look in a much more humane way at the desperate situation that people face as they're trying to just get out of human rights abuses and wars around the world?
So, the honourable member makes a really important point about actually what is happening in the Mediterranean, about the pressures that we have seen. And also the fact, as the Prime Minister said in his statement, that we've seen not just conflict, wars, persecution, but also some of the impact of climate change as well, also making people travel and can sometimes lead to people making dangerous journeys. We should be working to prevent those dangerous journeys in the first place and prevent the need for those dangerous journeys. And that is why the UK government and the Prime Minister announced last week, as part of the European Political Community Summit, that we would invest over £80 million alongside work with other European countries, also as part of the Rome process, both to tackle some of the wider criminal gang networks that still operate in the Mediterranean, but also to make sure that we address some of those sources and the injustices and the serious crises that can lead to people making dangerous journeys in the first place.
Jonathan Blash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I warmly welcome my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, to her place. One of the consequences of the collapse in our asylum system over the last few years has been the increasing and intolerable pressure on local communities, something my constituents in Hartlepool raise with me time and time again. Can I ask the Home Secretary to outline how the steps that she's taking will begin to reduce that pressure on communities like Hartlepool?
Well, can I welcome my honourable friend to his post? I think there is a real challenge from the way in which this sort of chaotic way the asylum system has been run that has led to the last-minute procurement of hotels that have ended up being in a chaotic system, ended up being extremely costly. And so actually everybody loses out from spending billions of pounds on this system, but also local authorities often not having time to work either with communities or with accommodation providers to make sure that things were managed in the right way. I will recognise, I think, the fact that we've got this problem where asylum decisions stopped being taken does mean that there's going to be some challenges now in getting that system working again, and that will mean it will take longer than we had initially anticipated to bring the backlog down. But we are determined to do this. It is the only way to get back to having a functioning system that really everybody should be able to support across the country.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the Home Secretary to her place, wish her well for the future, and thank her very much for the very helpful and confident answers that the Honourable Lady has given. Home Secretary, there is of course a glaring issue regarding border security much closer to home, and that is the Northern Ireland Republic of Ireland border. This border was patrolled by the Republic of Ireland officials, and understandably so, as their right to protect their nation is paramount. However, this also made clear that the Good Friday Agreement does not preclude the need to exert checks on the border. Home Secretary, what discussions have been had with the PSNI and security forces in Northern Ireland to ensure that the open border with the Republic of Ireland does not become a free route to UK immigration?
Well, it's a pleasure to get my first question from the front dispatch box from the honourable member. I look forward to very many more. He, of course, raises important issues. Of course, the border issues, of course, between Northern Ireland and Ireland are, of course, different. We have different arrangements, rightly so, that reflect our long-shared history. But we also have very close cooperation, and we have close policing cooperation, we have close information sharing, we do have additional information sharing that isn't currently possible under the arrangements we've inherited with other European countries, and I think it's really important that those information sharing arrangements continue, and hopefully we can build on them with other European partners as well.
Pam Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. I share her astonishment at the scale of the mismanagement of the asylum system by the previous government. My constituency in Colchester has hosted many asylum seekers and indeed refugees over the years. We're a city of sanctuary. Our local authorities have played a full part in supporting that work. But may I ask the Home Secretary, will she confirm that those local authorities will be fully engaged in work going forward to ensure we've got more effective support systems? Thank you.
My honourable friend is right to raise the importance of working closely with local authorities. We are determined to do that. My right honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, already has work in chain looking at how we can better have work and cooperation between the Home Office and the local authorities. And it is also important to recognise that really through very many generations, refugees have come to this country and have contributed to our economy, to society, and been a hugely important part of that. It is partly because it's so important that we have that history that it's also so crucial to get the whole system functioning again instead of the chaos that we've got at the moment, which just undermines everybody's confidence.
Oliver Ryan.
I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. The people of Burnley, Padiham and Briarfield want to see these crossings stopped and these gangs smashed and will welcome her tough action today. Because of the previous government's complete failure to control our borders, they spent millions of pounds a week on asylum hotels. What will she do to speed up the processing of people in those hotels and end their use?
We have to do all of these things, Mr. Speaker. We have to, and I welcome the honourable member to Parliament too. We have to have the action on the criminal gangs who are exploiting the situation in the first place, and that does involve much stronger cooperation with other European colleagues, and that must include the new counter-terror powers that will be in the new legislation as part of the King's speech to strengthen the powers against organised immigration crime. But alongside, we've also just got to get the basics right. We've actually got to start taking decisions again, as well as speeding up the asylum decisions and making the system work again.
That completes that statement. Let the front benches change over. Right, we now come to the next statement. I call Ellie Reeves, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, the 19th of July, we saw a CrowdStrike software update on Microsoft systems result in a major global IT outage. It caused significant impacts around the world. Impacts were seen in the transport sector, with flights grounded in Europe, the US, and delays and cancellations here in the UK. On rail, live departure boards were impacted during the morning rush hour, and some media outlets lost the ability to provide live coverage. This caused substantial inconvenience for passengers hoping to travel for the summer holiday getaway on the busiest travel weekend of the year. Airports and airlines across the UK had measures in place to maintain safe operations, support passenger welfare, extend operating hours and deploy additional staff to support late-running operations to keep people moving where possible. As with all incidents, the sector will review their response and implement any learnings. More concerningly, large parts of the local UK healthcare system lost access to test results and appointment information, affecting mostly GP services. Tried and tested NHS contingency plans were enacted, and services are expected to be operating at full capacity in the next few days. Small businesses without dedicated IT support systems were heavily impacted due to disruption to card-only payment systems and ATMs, with many resorting to operate with cash only while firms worked to fix their systems. Many firms were able to get back online quickly, and the remaining are expected to restore operations this week. Officials from the National Cyber Security Centre quickly established the outages were not as the result of either a security incident or malicious cyber activity. The cause was instead identified to be a flawed CrowdStrike software update which caused Windows machines to crash. On Friday morning, CrowdStrike issued guidance on how to solve the problem, giving users a manual fix for each affected device or system. I now believe CrowdStrike is in the process of implementing an automated update which can be applied remotely and should therefore speed up recovery. However, there are still residual impacts from the failed update, and it's important that we continue to monitor the situation and the longer-term impacts to UK sectors and secondary impacts from international disruption. Ever since the incident occurred, the government has worked closely with both Microsoft and CrowdStrike. My Cabinet Office officials have been leading coordination of the government response across all impacted sectors of the economy. This included close monitoring of affected public services to ensure business continuity plans were enacted and services were supported as they came back online. 2 COBRA senior officials meetings were also convened on Friday to coordinate the response, and officials from across Her Majesty's Government met over the weekend to continuously monitor the impacts and the recovery process. I'm pleased to say that government services and the online services that government provides were and remain largely unaffected. My colleagues, including the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, the Health Secretary and Transport Secretary, attended briefings with officials throughout, and the Prime Minister was kept informed. The majority of the sectors that were impacted have now mostly recovered. The UK transport system, aviation, rail, road, maritime is running normally. NHS staff worked hard over the course of Friday and the weekend to quickly apply the fixes required, and my colleagues in the Department for Health and Social Care have confirmed that systems are now back online, including for GPs. Their advice is that patients should continue to attend their appointments unless told not to. There may still be some delays, and GPs will need to rebook appointments that could not be made during the IT outage. The public should continue to contact their GPs in the normal way. However, as IT systems are complex, we can expect that minor disruption will continue in some areas while systems continue to recover, but my officials expect these to be resolved in the next couple of days. I'd like to extend my thanks to everyone who has worked so hard to get systems up and running again, and all staff who have worked tirelessly to support individuals impacted by the outage. Following this incident, the Cabinet Office will work with the National Cyber Security Centre and other partners across government to review the lessons learned. The Central Digital and Data Office will work with the NCSC to implement any improvements to the existing response plans to cover both technical resilience features as well as cyber. The COBRA unit will work with departments to support their processes for establishing how the organisations and sectors they represent manage the impacts of the outage and what lessons have been learnt. As soon as this government was elected, we took immediate steps to begin legislating to protect public services and the third-party services they use. Our Cyber Security and Resilience Bill, including in the King's Speech, will strengthen our defences and ensure that more essential digital services than ever before are protected. For example, it will look at expanding the remit of the existing regulation, putting regulators on a stronger footing, and increasing reporting requirements to build a better picture in government of cyber threats. Technology failures can be as disruptive as cyber attacks, and the move to create the Centre for Digital Government within DCIT is aimed at creating a more resilient digital public sector. What this incident shows is how dependent the modern world is on complex and interconnected IT systems, and how essential preparedness for such events is, including business continuity planning. Notwithstanding the immense frustration and inconvenience the outage has caused, I'm pleased to see that effective contingency plans mitigated the potentially very, very serious impacts this outage could have had. I'm pleased also that there is to be a comprehensive process to identify the lessons from this episode. I hope these will lead to improvements which both help prevent similar incidents and further improve our resilience to system outages and the impacts they can have. And in this spirit, Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
Oliver Dowden.
Well, may I begin by welcoming the Honourable Lady to her role and thank her for her advanced state of the statement. In that role, I know she will be supported by a dedicated team of civil servants who represent the very best of public service, and I have no doubt that they will serve her as well as they did me. But she will also be aware of the enormous challenges facing this government and governments around the world in relation to cyber security. As I warned when I was the responsible minister, threats to public services and critical national infrastructure come from a range of challenges, from hostile state actors to human error and design flaws. Last week, we saw these challenges vividly brought to life. Following the corrupted antivirus update by CrowdStrike on Friday, 8.5 million Microsoft devices globally were rendered unusable. This left airports disrupted, patient records temporarily lost, and GPs unable to access important patient data, creating significant backlogs. This is more than an inconvenience, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to pay tribute to all those working in our public services for the efforts they undertook over the weekend to restore these services, and to the work of dedicated cyber specialists across government, including in the National Cyber Security Centre. In government, we undertook a wide range of measures to enhance the nation's cyber security, creating the National Cyber Security Centre, introducing Secure by Design, setting cyber resilience targets, launching GovAssure, and transforming the oversight of governmental cyber security. And now I note, as the Honourable Lady said, that the government intends to build on this progress by bringing forward a cyber security and resilience bill. Will the Minister therefore outline the timetable for this bill? And will the government consider mandatory cyber security targets for the UK public sector? And is the government considering obligations to ensure that infrastructure is designed to be resilient against common cause problems such as this one? What steps are being taken to enhance cybersecurity in the devolved administration and in parts of the public sector such as the NHS, which are operationally independent? And specifically in relation to this incident, what assessment has been made of the prevalence of CrowdStrike within critical national infrastructure? And what further reassurances can the government give in relation to the timetable for full recovery of key systems and data? In particular, can the Minister assure employees that this month's payroll will not be adversely affected? Britain's cyber industry is world-leading. Cybersecurity now employs over 60,000 people and brings in nearly £12 billion worth of revenue annually. This transformation was in part due to our £5.3 billion investment, which launched the country's first national cybersecurity strategy. I therefore urge the government, and I see the Chancellor in her place, to continue such investment. Incidents such as CrowdStrike should not deter us from the path of progress. We must embrace digitalisation and the huge improvements in public services that it offers. Indeed, the adoption of artificial intelligence across government is the closest thing we have to a silver bullet for public sector productivity. However, if we are to command public confidence, people must be assured that technology is safe, secure, and reliable. And incidents such as this demonstrate how reliant the government and public services are on large technology companies, and how much responsibility they have for the services that have become critical to people's lives and livelihoods. That's why, in government, I called for us to work more closely with leading technology firms to address these shared challenges. The best solution is partnership. So to that end, what further engagement will the Minister undertake with Microsoft and CrowdStrike and the wider sector to ensure there is no such recurrence? The task for us all is to build on existing progress that has transformed Britain's cyber defences and to enhance protections for British families, businesses, and indeed the very heart of government. And in that mission, the government can rely on the support of these benches.
I thank the Shadow Minister for his contribution and his questions, and particularly I would echo the thanks to all of those involved across the civil service and departments in dealing with the outage last Friday and mitigating the effects of it. I set out in my opening comments that our cybersecurity and resilience bill, which was included in the King's speech, will strengthen our defences and ensure that more digital services are protected, and that is a priority for this government. The bill will look at expanding the remit of existing regulation, putting regulators on a stronger footing and increasing reporting requirements so that we can build a better picture in government of cyber threats. And we'll also consider the implications of Friday's incident as we develop that legislation. But rest assured that we are working across government in relation to this to ensure resilience. As the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster said in his statement on the COVID Inquiry Module 1 report, he will lead a review to assess our national resilience against the full range of risks that the UK faces, and that includes cyber risks.
Chion Mora.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is a great pleasure to see the Minister in her place. As she said, the CrowdStrike outage is a reminder of the way in which technology is so integrated into our lives, making all our lives better, but also our dependence on standards of development, deployment and integration of new technology, which are largely not visible to us. I was reassured to hear of the steps that government and businesses have been taken to mitigate the impact, but I fear that small businesses and consumers do not have the same resources. So could the Minister tell us, or does she agree, that you shouldn't have to be able to reboot from a blue screen in order to enjoy the benefits of technology? And will her government move to ensure that consumers are better protected?
Go ahead.
I thank my honourable friend for that contribution, and also want to acknowledge all of the work that she has done in this area. It has been hugely valuable. She makes some really important points about making sure that consumers and small businesses are protected, as well as government departments and bigger business, and I'm sure that will be form part of the lessons learned from this incident, but also feed in to the bill that we'll be introducing.
Daisy Cooper.
Deputy Speaker, it's my first opportunity to welcome ministers to their places, and thank you for advance sight of the statement. I want to focus on the impact on the NHS in particular, and I'm sure my thanks and that of the entire House goes to all NHS staff who've been scrambling to deal with urgent inquiries from distressed patients. I wonder if I might press ministers for assurances on two particular patient groups who suffer from the need for time-critical care. First of all, there are some patients who always require blood test results before they commence urgent treatment or operations, and I wonder if there are any assurances on what attention they've been given by the NHS, both now and in any future scenarios. And secondly, those patients who are at extreme risk of getting an extremely ill from getting COVID. Since the last government scrapped the COVID medicines delivery unit, many vulnerable patients have been struggling to get the COVID antivirals they need from their GPs in time. That situation is made much worse when this kind of disruption happens. I wonder if she could provide any assurances about any attention that NHS England has given to these two patient cohorts, and if not, whether she might be willing to meet with me to discuss what we might do in future.
I thank the honourable member for her question and highlighting the issues facing vulnerable patients. I'm pleased to report that there were no reported impacts to 111 or 999 services, and that patients were able to acknowledge emergency care if required. The majority of the impact to GP services were accessing patient records, GP appointments and prescriptions. Patients who couldn't access GP appointments were able to attend urgent care services, and GPs were able to issue paper prescriptions. But I will pass on her concerns to my colleagues in the Department of Health, because they are incredibly important issues, and we need to make sure that vulnerable patients are protected going forward.
Pamela Nash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome both you to your very temporary position, and also to my honourable friend on the front bench, welcome her to her role. I'd like to ask if there's any further detail that the Minister could share with the House on the particular impact of this outage in Scotland, and ask her what conversations her department have had with the Scottish Government in recent days.
Thank you, and I welcome my honourable friend back to the House. It's fantastic to see her in her place, and rightly so. Thank you for the points that you have raised. They are very important and will be taken into account with the lessons learned.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I commend the Minister on her appointment. Does she agree with me that these events demonstrated that we are very far from being in a position to move into a cashless society? And given that the Chancellor is in her place, will she confirm that her government will do everything that it can to support the continued use of cash, which is so important to some of the most vulnerable people in our society?
I thank the honourable member for that point. Cash remains the second most commonly used form of payment in the UK, and we remain committed to ensuring access to cash for individuals and businesses. That's why we have got a commitment to 350 banking hubs, so that cash remains available to people. Thank you.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to welcome the Minister to place, particularly sat alongside the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I welcome the points that have been made with regard to resilience in public services, but can the Minister assure me that similar efforts are being made to ensure resilience when it comes to IT with regard to defence?
I thank my honourable friend for that contribution, and as I said in answer to a previous question, as soon as this government was elected, we took immediate steps to start legislating to better protect all our public services and the third-party services that they use through the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, which will be coming to Parliament.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, can I first of all welcome the Minister to her place, and I think congratulations are due to the Honourable Lady, for I understand the Honourable Lady was in charge of the elections for the Labour Party, so much of the success that there was over there, the Honourable Lady can take some credit for that. It's good to see a reward for the endeavours for hard work. Well done. When it comes to airlines, 171 flights cancelled, of which some of my constituents were stuck in London, couldn't get home to Belfast. When it came to banks, some of my constituents were out in the shops. They were buying their goods, and they found their credit cards didn't work because the system was down. When it comes to the health system, and just to give you some effective and the Department of Health in Northern Ireland said that hospital services in around 2/3 of GP surgeries faced problems. There was problems with patients in operating theatres, accessing staff rosters, and the whole system was an absolute chaos. So can I ask the Honourable Lady this question? Yeah, if I can. Does the Minister not agree that the issue has underlined the necessity of ensuring that we are prepared for cyber breakdown, whether that is intentionally done as an attack or unintentionally done? And would the Minister outline perhaps our preparedness for situations such as this, as well as our resilience in moving forward from those type problems for all parts of the United Kingdom, of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his kind comments, and can I just say that I'm sorry to learn of his constituents who were unable to get flights home or were unable to get GP appointments. I've talked in the statement about resilience going forward and making sure that we expand our cyber resilience, putting regulators on a stronger footing and getting a clear picture of cyber threats and how they can be dealt with. And he raises some very important points about that.
Kit Malthouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This was an extremely serious incident, which I suspect may well be detectable in the next GDP figures that we see coming out of the ONS. But I had two questions. In her statement, the Honourable Lady said she was pleased to say that government services and the online services that government provides were and remain largely unaffected. Could you just tell us which were in fact affected, or was largely just a euphemism for not affected at all? And secondly, it's quite difficult for members to get a handle on the full impact and spread of this particular contagion. Will she commit to lay in the House some kind of report that details the sectors that were affected, how seriously they were affected, including government systems, and whether and how there will be any resolution in the future? Because obviously we need to report to our constituents that in future these things are less likely to occur.
I set out the impact that the incident had on, for example, GP services, but things like the emergency services remained unaffected as far as we are aware. We are undergoing the lessons learned from the incident, and I'm sure we'll report back on that once that's been completed.
Joshua Reynolds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. GPs in my constituency of Maidenhead were affected on Friday like so many others, and I'd like to thank them for the work they did when, even though patients weren't able to get test results and appointments were missed, they managed to make sure that people received the best care possible. What assurances can the Minister give me about the lessons learnt from Friday so that patients can continue to receive the care they need when they need it?
I welcome the Honourable Gentleman to the House and place on record my thanks to the GP surgeries in Maidenhead who have done what they can to make sure that disruption for patients were at a minimum. We will be undertaking the lessons learned exercise from this, which I hope will offer some reassurances to his constituents along with the bill that will be going through Parliament.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm aware that the Minister is new to her role, so I'm going to ask her to consider things rather than to commit to doing things. Will she please consider continuing with the annual statement to Parliament on civil contingencies and risks that was committed to by the previous government? Will she also consider, when she's looking at the Cyber Security and Resilience Bill, assessing whether there is widespread use of certain software or hardware that could cause mass outages in the event that it is affected, such as in CrowdStrike? I'm not aware that we've seen a kind of analysis of that in previous outputs by the Cabinet Office, and I think it would be incredibly helpful for us to be aware of where those risks are.
I thank the Honourable Member for those suggestions and very happy to consider the points that she has raised.
I cannot be the only member who thinks how proud Mr and Mrs Reeves must be today. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
King's Speech, motion for an address, adjourned debate on question.
Now, I inform the House that Mr Speaker has selected Amendment H in the name of the Leader of the Opposition. The question is that an humble address be presented to His Majesty as on the order paper. I call Jeremy Hunt to move the amendment.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the amendment in the name of myself and the Leader of the Opposition. It is an important and rather painful part of our democracy that I am today as Shadow Chancellor responding to the King's Speech in exactly the same way the new Chancellor responded to me just a few months ago. So I want to start by congratulating her, as well as Mr and Mrs Reeves. As the father of two girls myself, one of whom has her 10th birthday today, I warmly welcome the smashing of a glass ceiling with Britain's first female Chancellor. As I said on election night, she has led the Labour Party on a difficult journey which has changed it for the better. Her stated commitment to fiscal responsibility, stability and economic growth has been consistent and I'm sure not always easy, Unfortunately for us, her success in holding the line means we face rather a lot of Labour MPs on the government benches, but I wish her well in her new role. I also commend to her the superb Treasury officials she now inherits and want to put on record my gratitude to them for the excellent work they did for me, staying up in the middle of the night ahead of fiscal events, engaging in tense negotiations with spending departments, and occasionally, it has to be said, number 10, bringing me endless flat whites and Pret lunches to keep me going, and most of all, making my family feel welcome in the goldfish bowl that is Downing Street. And it is part of the magic of democracy that those same officials have seamlessly transferred their allegiance from me to her, and I know they will serve her extremely well. Now, in opposition, we won't oppose for its own sake, and there are a number of bills we welcome in the King's speech. She's right to focus on growth, and the improvements on planning build on many reforms introduced by the last government, including the 110 growth measures I introduced in last year's autumn statement. Any boost to house building is also welcome. We delivered 1 million homes in the last Parliament, and she will soon find out that if she's to deliver 1.5 million, she won't be able to duck reforming environmental regulations, a change which Labour blocked in the last Parliament, but which will deliver an extra 100,000 homes. But I caution her not to over-rely on bringing back top-down targets. In the end, we will only build more houses if we change attitudes to new housing, and that is unlikely to happen if unpopular targets are steamrolled through local communities. We'll also look carefully at her proposed budget responsibility bill. We're proud that a Conservative government set up the OBR, and I commend the work of Richard Hughes and his team. We didn't always agree, but that in the end is the point of an independent watchdog. And we all understand the politics of a bill that allows the government to make endless references to the mini-budget. But if she's really committed to fiscal responsibility alongside growth, I hope she will today confirm she will not fiddle with the 5-year debt rule to allow increased debt through the back door. We, and it has to be said, markets will be monitoring the overall level of debt very carefully to make sure that doesn't happen. And I also hope she commissions the OBR to do 10-year forecasts of our long-term growth rate rather than 5 years as at present, in order to bake long-term decision-making into Treasury thinking. I am very happy to give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Grateful to the Shadow Chancellor for giving way. He was talking about fiscal responsibility just now. During the election campaign, he committed to a series of tax cuts. I noticed yesterday on the Laura Kuenssberg show that he said that it wouldn't have been possible for him to proceed with those tax cuts. What is it that has changed, and why did he make that commitment during the election campaign, knowing full well that he couldn't afford to carry it out?
For the Honourable Gentleman for making that intervention, because it allows me to explain why he's completely mistaken in what he is saying. We offered a set of carefully funded tax cuts, fully funded tax cuts, unlike the £38.5 billion of unfunded spending commitments that came from the Labour Party. But we always said they would be brought in over time, over the next Parliament. We did not make a commitment that they would come in immediately, and indeed they would not have, but we would have done so in a responsible way. But when it comes to dubious claims, there are some rather dubious ones the new Chancellor has herself been making that do not withstand scrutiny. Now, she says, for example, that the economy would have been £140 billion bigger if we'd matched the average OECD growth rate. But as she knows, the OECD is a very diverse group of 38 countries, including many with economies very different to our own, such as Turkey or Mexico or Luxembourg. And a much more meaningful comparison is with other similar G7 economies, where, since 2010, we've grown faster than France, faster than Italy, faster than Germany, and faster than Japan. Indeed, the IMF say that thanks to difficult measures taken by the last Conservative government, we will grow faster than any of those 4 countries, not just in the short term, but over the next 6 years. And one of the reasons for that is our record on attracting investment. Since 2010, greenfield foreign direct investment has been higher in the UK than anywhere in the world except the United States and China. In the last year alone, Nissan, JLR, Tata, BMW Mini, Google and Microsoft have all been voting for the UK with their dollars. And that is not least because of cuts in business taxation, such as full expensing, introduced by the last government. If she now looks for backdoor ways to increase business taxation, as many fear she will risk the very attractiveness of the UK to foreign investors, of which she is now the beneficiary. I give way to the Honourable.
To the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. This point of investment is very important for my constituents in Stockton North, where we have many companies poised to invest billions of pounds in industrial investment, and they tell me that they prize economic stability above all else. And so I wonder if he might commit now to supporting the Budget Responsibility Bill to give those investors the security that they would need.
Yeah. Well, we are going to study the bill very carefully when it's published. But yes, we are minded to support it, subject to having had a close look at it, because we think it's perfectly sensible. Whether it's completely necessary or not is a different question, but it's perfectly sensible. Now, but I do want to move on to some elements of the King's speech about which we have grave concerns. Bills which a Times editorial this week described as a dose of traditional socialist dogma. Tony Blair came to office having removed the old Clause 4 of the Labour Party constitution because he knew that state-run businesses are rarely successful and usually end up being bailed out by the taxpayer. But with its railway and energy plans, the government last week brought forward more nationalisation than Blair ever did, indeed more than any government in modern times. And I just say to her, if she really cares about fiscal responsibility, she should beware. The reason unions like publicly owned utilities is that it gives them more leverage on pay and more ability to demand bailouts. Unlearning the lessons of history will mean more strikes and bigger bills for the taxpayer. An even bigger concern for business is the impact on jobs of Labour's New Deal for workers. Since 2010, we have seen the creation of almost 4 million jobs, nearly 800 jobs, for every single day Conservative governments were in office. The President of the CBI described the UK as a job creation factory, but like many others, he expressed concerns that the Deputy Prime Minister's new Labour laws could put that at risk. Day one rights sound attractive, but employers fear it will mean a flood of tribunal claims, meaning it's safer not to offer a job at all. That's why the Federation of Small Businesses responded to the King's speech by saying companies were worried about increased costs and risks. In the end, Madam Deputy Speaker, French-style labour laws will lead to French levels of unemployment, which are nearly double our own, indeed close to what they were when the last Labour government was in office. By contrast, Conservatives have nearly halved unemployment over the last 14 years, and it would be a tragedy for working families up and down the country if the new government turned the clock back. Finally, the most dubious claim that we have heard of all is this nonsense about the worst economic inheritance since the Second World War, which everybody knows is just a pretext for long-planned tax rises. You can see what nonsense this is from a simple comparison to the last time we had a change of party running the government in 2010. Inflation then was 3.4% compared to 2% today. Unemployment was at 8% compared to 4.4% today. Growth was forecast at the time to be one of the slowest in the G7 compared to the fastest today. Instead of an economy where markets and the pounds were facing meltdown, she has inherited one which the ONS said growth was going gangbusters. And since the election, that has been backed up by even more data. May's GDP figures show Britain's growth was double the rate predicted by economists, the fastest in more than 2 years. New figures from S&P show that in February, British businesses were amongst the most optimistic in the world. Top of the league again, according to the ONS. Inflation has remained at the target 2% level. Now, in her BBC interview yesterday, the Chancellor, old habits die hard, glossed over those figures, putting on the most shocked expression she could muster to pretend that public finances are worse than she expected. But the root cause of the pressure on public finances, £400 billion of pandemic support, £94 billion of cost of living support, was never a secret. Indeed, the Labour Party supported those measures and in some cases called for us to go further. Nor were the difficult decisions we had to take to pay for them a secret either. When we had to increase borrowing, increase tax and reduce spending plans in the autumn statement of 2022, Labour did not oppose us. Like all chancellors, she faces fiscal challenges. Welcome to the job. But let me tell her, that job is a whole lot easier because faced with an economic crisis 2 years ago, Conservatives took decisions that her predecessor Labour government ducked completely after the financial crisis. And that's why she has a deficit of 4.4% this year compared to 10.3% left behind for the Conservatives in 2010. And she didn't just compare her inheritance to 2010. She claimed, Madam Deputy Speaker, to have the worst inheritance since the Second World War. Is she really saying that she faces conditions worse than Geoffrey Howe in 1979 with a winter of discontent, stagflation, 83% top rate of tax, and a Labour government that went with a begging bowl to be bailed out by the IMF? And she knows perfectly well herself that that claim is nonsense. Otherwise, why, in her first week, would she announce £7.3 billion of spending on her National Wealth Fund without a spending review, without a budget, and without any external validation from the OBR? As Paul Johnson of the IFS says, thanks to the OBR, the nation's books are wide open and fully transparent, so pretending things are worse than expected, his words, really won't wash. And as she establishes her reputation, it is surely unwise to base your big central argument on a claim so patently ridiculous. But we all know exactly why she's doing it. She wants to lay the ground for tax rises that she has been planning all along. And that leads to two major concerns on this side of the House. The first is this. She says her number one mission is growth. But all around the world, evidence suggests countries with higher taxes tend to grow more slowly. Lower taxes, when funded properly, boost growth, as we saw with full expensing and the national insurance cuts last year, both of which the OBR confirmed add to our GDP. But keeping taxes down is hard work. I saw the numbers she's seeing just a few weeks ago, and the official advice was clear. With public sector pay restraint, productivity plans, such as we announced in the budget, and welfare reform, it's perfectly possible to balance the books without tax rises. Not easy, but government never is, but not impossible. Yet all those three things, pay restraint, productivity improvements, and welfare reform, were glaringly omitted from the King's speech. Instead, she's chosen an easier path. What Labour Party sources told The Guardian was a doctor's mandate to raise taxes. Now, she's ruled out raising income tax, national insurance and VAT. But she shouldn't think for 1 second that other tax rises will not impact working people. Capital gains tax destroys the pensions people build up over their lifetime. Business tax rises are passed on to customers, leading to higher bills. And taxes on banks and energy companies lead to fewer companies operating in the UK, a lower tax take, and less money for public services like the NHS. And that, to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the biggest contradiction in this new programme. A government that says it wants the fastest growth in the G7, but plans tax rises in the very same breath that will make that growth harder, if not impossible, to achieve. But even if such an approach is misconceived. It is nonetheless a legitimate choice for a governing party. What is not acceptable is just 18 days after the election to be laying the ground for tax rises after she promised us 50 times in the election campaign she had no plans to raise them. Exactly. Every Labour government in history has raised taxes and raised spending. If she wanted to do the same, she should have had the courage to make the case for that before the election. Instead, she is softening us up for a colossal U-turn that will lead to lower growth, less money for public services and massive public anger, which is why I commend to the House the amendment in the opposition's name.
The original question was that a humble address be presented to His Majesty, as on the order paper, since when Amendment H has been proposed, as on the order paper. The question is that the amendment be made. The Chancellor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a pleasure to open today's King's Speech debate on behalf of His Majesty's Government. And I always enjoy debating the Right Honourable Gentleman, though I must say I rather prefer doing it from this side of the chamber. I appreciate his generous words on my appointment and also his tribute to officials who I can confirm are indeed first-rate. It has been over 14 years since a Labour government was in office for a state opening of Parliament. 14 years of chaos, 14 years of economic irresponsibility, 14 years of wasted opportunities. And 14 years since there has been a Labour Chancellor of the Exchequer standing at this dispatch box. Today I pay tribute to my most recent Labour predecessor, the late Lord Darling. He was an outstanding Chancellor, a kind man and a good friend. Mr. Speaker, it is also the very first time that there has been a female Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now, on my arrival at the Treasury, I learnt that there is some debate about when the first Chancellor was appointed. It was either 800 years ago, when one Ralph de Leicester was given the title of Chancellor of the Exchequer for the first time. Alternatively, 900 years ago, when Henry the Treasurer was referenced in the Domesday Book. Or even 1,000 years ago, when Alfred the Great was in effect the first Master of the Mint. Either way, I am sure that the whole House would agree on one thing. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have waited far too long for a woman to be Chancellor of the Exchequer. And so I stand here today proud, but also deeply conscious of the responsibility that I now have. A responsibility to women across the country whose work is too often undervalued. And a responsibility to every young woman and girl who should know that there is no ceiling on their ambitions and no limit on their potential. I'll give way.
Thank you very much. 7 Tory men have stood at the dispatch box over the last 14 years, and the result has been an economic crisis, crumbling public services and a cost of living crisis. Can we expect a change of approach from the new Chancellor and female Chancellor of the Exchequer?
Well, one thing is I hope to be in post for a bit longer than some of my predecessors. Madam Deputy Speaker, as tempting as it is, I don't intend to conduct a full sweep of the 1,000 years of economic history from the dispatch box today. I'm sorry. However, we must talk about the last 14 years. I warned that whoever won the general election would inherit the worst set of economic circumstances since the Second World War. And I've seen nothing to change my mind since I arrived at the Treasury. I will update the House on our public spending inheritance before Parliament rises for recess. And I heard what the Shadow Chancellor said from the dispatch box now and on the television yesterday, to claim that I should be grateful for what he has left us. Unbelievable. Because the Right Honourable Gentleman knows the truth, and he's now trying to rewrite history. In doing so, he has reminded the British people why the Conservatives lost the election. They're out of touch, deluded, and unable to defend the indefensible. And in the weeks ahead, it will become clear what his party did. They stored up problems, they failed to take the tough decisions, and then they ran away, leaving it to us, the Labour government, to pick up the pieces and clear up their mess. But today I want to focus on one thing above all else: economic growth. Since 2010, Conservative Chancellor after Conservative Chancellor, including the right honourable gentleman opposite, have stressed the importance of economic growth. We've had more growth plans than we've had Prime Ministers or Chancellors, and that's quite a lot. But growth requires more than talk. It requires action. Like so much else with the previous administration, when you scratch beneath the surface, the facade crumbles, and all that is left is the evidence of 14 years of failure. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and I congratulate her on her appointment. She's making an excellent speech. Friday's ONS report showed that public sector borrowing was 25% higher than forecast. Does she agree with me that this underlines why it was so important to have a fully costed and fully funded manifesto to restore confidence in the public finances, and why it was a surprise that certain other parties did not follow the same route?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and he speaks powerfully, and I want to pay tribute to the work that he did in the last Parliament, particularly around education and skills. I think it's a really important point, this, because the manifesto that we stood on, for me, the most important pages were the 3 grey pages at the back of the manifesto that set out all of our spending commitments and how they are paid for. And that was important because to earn the trust of the electorate, you have to be really clear of where the money is going to come from and what you're going to use it for. And that's what we did in our manifesto, and that's what we will do in government. Now, the right honourable gentleman, the Shadow Chancellor, made some points about GDP and comparing it with other countries. But since 2010, UK GDP per capita, and that's the most important measure because that is how people feel, the money that they have, it's grown slower than the G7 average, it's grown slower than the EU average, and it's grown slower than the OECD average. Treasury analysis that I requested when I became Chancellor shows that had the UK economy grown at the average OECD rate these last 14 years, our economy would be over £140 billion bigger today. This could have brought in an additional £58 billion of tax revenues in the last year alone, money that could have been used for our schools, our hospitals and other vital public services. Madam Deputy Speaker, growth is about more than just lines on a chart, though. It's about the money in people's pockets. And Treasury analysis shows that achieving the rate of growth of similar economies would have been worth more than £5,000 for every household in Britain. Now, the Shadow Chancellor stands up today and once again claims that he's bequeathed a great legacy. I mean, seriously, it's the first Parliament on record where living standards were lower at the end of the Parliament than they were at the start. The highest level of debt since the 1960s. The highest tax burden in 70 years. Mortgages through the roof. The economy only just recovering after last year's recession. Economic inactivity numbers last week showing a further rise. And borrowing numbers last week showing over £3 billion more borrowing than the OBR expected. That is their legacy. Madam Deputy Speaker, if that is such a good inheritance, I would hate to see what a bad one looks like. And I think deep down the Shadow Chancellor knows this. In fact, he does know it. Yesterday, the Shadow Chancellor admitted what we all know, that the manifesto that he campaigned on was undeliverable, that the money for the tax cuts that he promised simply was not there. And if the Shadow Chancellor wants to show the country that his party has listened, that they have learned from their mistakes, the Shadow Chancellor would have used his speech this afternoon to apologise, but he didn't. And it tells you everything you need to know about this Conservative Party. Party first, country second. Political self-interest ahead of the national interest. Irresponsibility before the public good. So let me say this to the Conservative Party. We will not stop holding you responsible for the damage that you have done to our economy and to our country. Never again will we allow them to crash our economy. They failed this country. They shied away from tough choices, and we won't repeat their mistakes. So it falls on us this new Labour government to fix the foundations so we can rebuild Britain and make every part of our country better off. We will govern through actions, not words, and we have already begun to do just that, because there is no time to waste. Less than 72 hours after I was appointed as Chancellor, I put growth at the very heart of our work. Working alongside my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister, I set out reforms to our planning system. Reforms that the party opposite didn't deliver in 14 years. Restoring mandatory targets to build the homes that we desperately need. Ending the absurd ban on onshore wind to deliver homegrown, cheaper energy. And recovering planning appeals for key projects that have been sitting on the desks of government ministers in the last Parliament for far too long. Tough decisions that the Conservative Party already opposes. Why was this my first act as Chancellor? Because getting our economy growing is urgent. And this King's speech shows that we are getting to work. I'll happily give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful. On the matter of mandatory housing targets, having been a constituency MP for 23 years and seen this tried a number of different ways, could I humbly offer to her in all sincerity, there is such a thing as good development, but it only works if it's something that you do with people and not to people. And this Stalinist approach won't work.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been compared to a lot of things, but never compared to Joseph Stalin. Now, our approach is a brownfield-first approach, and we will reintroduce those mandatory targets, but of course it's up to local authorities and local communities to decide where the housing should be built. But the answer can't always be no, because if the answer is always no, we'll continue as we are, with home ownership declining and mortgages and rents going through the roof. And on this side of the House, we are not willing to tolerate this. Now, this King's speech shows that we are getting to work. As my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, set out, our programme for government will be founded on principles of security, fairness and opportunity. And our number one mission is to secure sustained economic growth in our great country through a new partnership between government, business and working people, which prioritises wealth creation for all of our communities. We will fix the foundations of our economy so we can rebuild Britain and make every part of our country better off. There are a number of important pieces of legislation in the King's speech that will help us to grow the economy. Today I want to focus on three in particular. The Budget Responsibility Bill to restore economic stability, the National Wealth Fund Bill to drive investment, and the Pension Scheme Bill to reform our economy. Because they speak not just to our programme for government, but also to trust in politics. They show that we will govern as we campaigned, and we will meet our promises to the British people. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the election campaign, I said that the first step that we would take would be to restore economic stability, because stability is the precondition to a healthy and growing economy. It is how we keep taxes, inflation and mortgages as low as possible. After years of irresponsibility, we are putting our economy on firm ground once again. We introduced the new Budget Responsibility Bill on Thursday to deliver on our manifesto commitment to introduce a fiscal lock so that I can keep an iron grip on our country's finances. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm extremely grateful to the Chancellor. Thanks very much indeed. She and I sat on the Treasury Select Committee together many years ago, and she will know from our time together that economics is as much art as it is science. So given that she's effectively giving a veto over economic policy to the OBR through this bill, she must recognise that we need to understand what the people in the OBR believe, what their theories of economics are, what principles they attach themselves to. So what further scrutiny will be available for this House, for the chair of the OBR and the people who are doing the forecast, given that effectively they will be co-chancellor with her during the next few years?
Well, look, the Treasury Select Committee, as the right honourable gentleman knows, can call in the chair and other members of the Office of Budget Responsibility. But the comments from the right honourable gentleman show exactly why we need this bill, so that never again can we have a repeat of the mini-budget. Now, this bill will require every announcement which makes significant and permanent changes to tax and spending to be subject to an independent assessment by the Office of Budget Responsibility. Why? Because unfunded, reckless commitments don't just threaten our public finances, they threaten people's incomes and they threaten people's mortgages. We saw that in the wake of the mini-budget presided over by the former member for South West Norfolk. Now, I understand that she's taken umbrage in recent days at the idea that this episode was disastrous. Well, if any member on the opposition benches would like to dispute that fact today, I'd be more than happy to give way. Well, they cheered at the time, Madam Deputy Speaker, but they're not cheering it now, and I don't imagine they put that on their leaflets. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, they should be ashamed. They should be ashamed of what they did, because people up and down the country are still paying the price for the chaos that they caused. But we say never again. And the Budget Responsibility Bill will enshrine that commitment in law.
Will my right honourable friend give way?
I will give way, yes.
Well, those from the party opposite during the pandemic were awarded, their friends and family were awarded contracts for work that were never fulfilled. And my constituents in York Outer would love to know how can we get their money back, perhaps through the role of the COVID Corruption Commissioner.
Well, I enjoyed campaigning for my honourable friend in York Outer, and it's great to see him in his place today. Madam Deputy Speaker, stability means a tough set of fiscal rules, but it also means spending public money wisely, as my honourable friend says. The past government hiked taxes while allowing waste and inefficiency to spiral out of control. Nowhere was this more evident than during the pandemic, especially when it came to PPE. Because the former Prime Minister, when he was Chancellor, signed cheque after cheque after cheque for billions of pounds worth of contracts that did not deliver for the NHS when it needed it. And that is simply unacceptable. So today I can announce that I am beginning the process to appoint a COVID Corruption Commissioner to get back what is owed to the British people. Because that money today in the hands of fraudsters belongs in our public services, and we want that money back. The Commissioner will report to me, working with the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, and their report will be presented to Parliament for all members to see. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will not tolerate waste. I will treat taxpayers' money with respect, and I will return stability to our public finances. Madam Deputy Speaker, the second bill I want to speak to today is the National Wealth Fund Bill. We know that economic stability is vital for investors and for business. The small business looking to grow, the global business looking to expand in the UK, the entrepreneur looking to take their first steps. And to support them, stability must sit alongside investment. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the Chancellor for giving way, and I wonder, in relation to the effective use of public funds, whether she's aware not only of the alleged corruption of the way in which COVID aid was distributed, but if you look at the way that, in fact, a large number of tax loopholes exist in this economy. For example, in Cornwall, over £500 million of taxpayers' money was handed out to holiday homeowners, not only through COVID aid, but also through the Small Business Rate Relief Scheme, and indeed other tax loopholes, whilst at the same time only a third of that amount has gone into social housing for first-time users. So will the Chancellor look indeed at the whole issue of parity of the way in which public funds are used in order to support people who need housing?
Well, I would like to welcome the honourable member back to this place. I enjoyed sparring with him in my early days in Parliament, and it's great to see him back in the House. And the honourable gentleman is absolutely right that we need to get value for money for all tax incentives, and I will make sure that the Treasury, but also the Department, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government looks at the changes that he suggests. The last government's record on investment was dismal. We now sit behind every single member of the G7 when it comes to business investment as a share of GDP. Now, that isn't an abstract economic problem. Weak investment holds back productivity and it hurts living standards. It leaves households poorer and it leaves wages lower. So this King's Speech deals directly with the need to unlock private investment through a new National Wealth Fund Bill. This will be supported by an injection of capital, part funded by an increase to the windfall tax on oil and gas giants. It will make transformative investments in industries of the future, like carbon capture and storage and green hydrogen. It will mobilise billions of pounds worth of additional private sector investment in our industrial heartlands and coastal communities, while generating a return for taxpayers. The National Wealth Fund will work with local partners, including mayors, as well as the devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, to develop an investment offer which meets the needs of all of our nations and regions. It will simplify a complex landscape of support for businesses today, aligning key institutions like the UK Infrastructure Bank and the British Business Bank under one banner of the National Wealth Fund.
Would my right honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I'm very grateful to her, and I heartily applaud what she's saying about the renewed windfall tax. Will she also look at the fact that in this country we actually have the lowest basic rate of tax at 38%, I believe, on oil and gas companies anywhere in the world? The average is 74%. In this country, it has been 38%. Will she look at that?
Well, we committed in our manifesto, as the Honourable Gentleman knows, to have a 3 percentage point uplift from the current energy profits levy. And we will use that to fund the National Wealth Fund. The National Wealth Fund will power jobs and prosperity in all parts of our country. And this work is already well underway. I welcomed the report of the National Wealth Fund Task Force in my first week in office. And I want to thank the former Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, and the whole task force for their outstanding work. This bill will put the National Wealth Fund onto a statutory footing with clear objectives, crowding in private investment to create wealth right across Britain.
Will the Chancellor give way?
I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank the Chancellor for giving way. Under the Conservatives, businesses and working people were held back by a complete and abject failure to build the new homes that my constituents in Ealing Southall were crying out for, the laboratory spaces that will provide the jobs of the future, and the national infrastructure needed for businesses and working people to prosper. Will she assure this House that under her chancellorship we will finally get Britain building again?
Yeah. I welcome the election of my honourable friend in Ealing Southall, and I think her constituents in this whole House can see what a strong advocate will be for her local community. My honourable friend is absolutely right. We've got to get Britain building again. We've got to build the homes, the transport infrastructure, the energy infrastructure and the digital infrastructure that our country desperately needs. I'm very happy to take an intervention.
The Chancellor for giving way, but for giving me a chance to be intervened. But I can also ask the Chancellor this point. When it comes to rebuilding and the house building programme that the Right Honourable Lady has suggested should happen, in the papers today it suggests that people who earn a £70,000 mortgage, £70,000 wage can't get a mortgage. In Northern Ireland, those on a smaller wage can't get a mortgage either. So can I ask the Chancellor this direct and hopefully positive question with a positive answer? Is it possible that the issue of mortgages and access to mortgages for those who want to, and Northern Ireland can benefit, as the Honourable Lady has quite clearly said they will? Thank you.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention. One of the biggest challenges people have in getting a mortgage is building up the deposit. And that's why we've committed to a mortgage guarantee scheme to help those people who can't rely on the bank of mum and dad to be able to get on the housing ladder. That's a really important commitment, as well as that commitment to build the homes. Because frankly, unless you build more homes, you're going to find that home ownership continues to go backwards, as it did in the last few years. Alongside the stability and investment in our economy must come reform. Because to deliver economic growth requires tough choices. It means taking on vested interests and confronting issues that politicians have too often avoided. The last government refused to engage with these choices, and they refused to level with the British people about what was required. This government will be different. We've demonstrated that already with a series of reforms to our planning system, and we are bringing forward further legislation in the King's Speech to get Britain building. Today, I want to focus on another area of our economy where reform is vital: our pension schemes. People across our country work hard to save for the future.
They want a better, more secure retirement with the most generous pension possible. At the same time, British businesses with high growth potential need capital to support their expansion. Pension funds are at the heart of this. There will soon be over £800 billion of assets in defined contribution pension schemes. But for too long, these assets have not been targeted towards UK markets. That has impacted British savers and it has impacted British business. The last government said that this was a problem too, and I welcome that acknowledgement. But they never introduced the legislation needed to make the change. We believe in deeds, not words, so we will strengthen investment from private pension providers by bringing forward the Pension Schemes Bill in the King's Speech. It will boost pension pots by over £11,000 through a new and improved value for money framework. And through an investment shift in DC schemes, just a 1% shift in asset allocation could deliver £8 billion of new productive investment into the UK economy. To ensure that the bill is as strong as possible, I am today launching a pensions investment review, led by the first ever joint Commons Minister appointed between the Treasury and the Department for Work and Pensions, the Honourable Member for Wickham, the Pensions Minister. This will include a review of the local government pension scheme, the 7th largest pension fund in the world, to ensure it is getting the best value from the savings of nearly 7 million public sector workers, the majority of whom are women and the majority of whom are low paid. They deserve a pension that is working for them. Together, these reforms will kickstart economic growth by unlocking investment which has been tied up for too long. I've already given way to the honourable gentleman. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know...
Could I just urge the House to think about interventions, because there is a very long list of members who want to speak and lots of people who want to make their maiden speech, and it would be great if you could all get in.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, you'll be pleased to know that I won't apprise the House of every bill which supports economic growth in the King's Speech, but needless to say, there are many more. From the English Devolution Bill to transfer power back into the hands of local communities, to the Employment Rights Bill to make work pay, and the Great British Energy Bill to take back control of our country's energy and create new jobs across the United Kingdom. Growing our economy flows through almost every word of this address. Madam Deputy Speaker, the British people put their trust in us on the 4th of July to fix the foundations of our economy, to rebuild Britain, and to make every part of our great country better off. I do not take that trust for granted. We will not let people down, and I am ready to deliver the change that we need. I know it will take time. I know it will require hard work, but we are already getting on with the job. By ending a reckless, chaotic approach to economic management, by putting politics back in the service of working people, and by making economic growth our fundamental mission. Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend the address to the House.
Sarah Olney, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair, and it's a real pleasure to be contributing to this debate on behalf of the Liberal Democrats, not just because I'm speaking on behalf of so many more of them than I used to, but also because it gives me an opportunity to welcome the Chancellor of the Exchequer to her place, to express my personal congratulations on becoming the first woman in the UK's history to hold the position. I'm personally delighted. I've spent many years working in banking and finance. I know how male-dominated those industries still are, and I wish the Honourable Lady well in her new role and look forward to working with her over the coming Parliament. The Liberal Democrats will be vigorous in scrutinising her plans, but we will always work in the national interest, and I can assure her of the support of these benches on all those matters on which we can agree. And I'm sure that one of the things on which we can certainly agree is that the Honourable Lady and her colleagues have received a dismal inheritance from the departing Conservative administration. The numbers reveal a dispiriting picture of low growth, high interest rates and a record fall in living standards, delivered by an out-of-touch and incompetent Conservative Party that took people for granted for years. Our constituents see this situation reflected in the increases in their mortgage payments, the hike in their energy bills, the prices they pay at the tills for their weekly shop. They see it in public services that are in a state of crisis and an NHS that is failing to deliver the care they need. Liberal Democrats welcome the sense of seriousness with which this King's Speech focuses on stability, reinvesting in our crippled public services and growing the economy. And while we welcome measures such as the introduction of an Industrial Strategy Council to coordinate policy on economic growth, the immediate and pressing problems that our constituents are facing in their everyday lives cannot just be addressed by centralised top-down institutions run from Whitehall. Our economy needs to grow from the bottom up, bringing prosperity to every community, taking away the barriers to entry for small businesses and enabling individuals all across the country to make the most of their skills and talents. And Liberal Democrats wants to see urgent measures introduced which will give immediate support to families and small businesses. While we were out on the doorsteps for the general election campaign, myself and my 71 colleagues heard clearly the message from our constituents that their biggest priority was fixing the NHS. We are here because we promised to fight hard for a better NHS for our constituents and for communities across the country, and that is why we are calling for the Chancellor to immediately draw up a budget for health and social care. Because you can't deliver economic growth without fixing the crisis in our NHS and in social care. NHS waiting lists are at an all-time high. It can take weeks to see a GP, and it is now almost impossible to see an NHS dentist. Everyone deserves access to the care they need, when they need it and where they need it. A successful health and social care system is fundamental to a fair society and our country's prosperity. And the failures of the Conservative administration led to a dramatic increase in the number of people experiencing long-term sickness conditions, and the Liberal Democrats will continue to push for public service investment to help reduce NHS waiting lists to get people back to work.
My honourable friend give way.
With pleasure.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does she agree with me that reforming social care is one of the most urgent priorities of this government? The Cornwall Hospital Trust recently announced that £26 million a year is spent on patients who are medically well but are unable to be discharged due to a lack of social care packages.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. He's absolutely right, of course, and it's wonderful to see him in his place, and the people of North Cornwall will be well served by his championing of social care in particular, and that is why it was front and centre of the Liberal Democrat manifesto in the general election. The most direct way to alleviate poverty is to increase the money paid to the poorest households. We know that those of our fellow citizens currently living in the severest poverty are likely to be families with small children. Growing up in poverty affects children's educational chances and is likely to impact their physical and mental health, holding them back from achieving their true potential. Taking immediate steps to tackle child poverty should therefore be a priority. We believe that removing the two-child cap is the most cost-effective way of immediately lifting 500,000 children out of poverty, while helping to make costs more manageable for parents. This would have a direct benefit to families struggling with a cost-of-living crisis. Not only do we have a moral obligation to change this unnecessary policy, but it's the most cost-effective way of alleviating poverty with a broad range of economic advantages, including supporting more parents back into the workforce. So I urge the Chancellor of the Exchequer to remove the two-child limit on social security payments in her first budget to ensure that all families who need it receive immediate reassurance and support. But families of all sizes are suffering under the cost of living crisis and desperately need help. Our schools are increasingly having to battle the effects of poverty to ensure that children are able to attend school and have the best possible chance of reaching their potential. And too many children are distracted from their lessons because they haven't had enough to eat. The Liberal Democrats set out plans in their manifesto for free school meals for all children living in poverty, with an ambition to extend them to all children once public finances allow. The Liberal Democrats are calling on the government to consider funding free school meals as a priority to alleviate the pressure on the finances of the families who are struggling the most, and it will contribute to positive educational outcomes that will benefit us all in the future. The Liberal Democrats welcome many of the measures in the King's Speech that aim to boost economic growth, and we support the government's objectives to make this a priority. We welcome moves to boost stability and to provide strategic leadership via an Industrial Strategy Council and to increase investment through pension reform. However, our small businesses and our local high streets need immediate support, and the government needs to do more to ensure that economic growth can reach every part of the United Kingdom and that small businesses and entrepreneurs can quickly rediscover the confidence that they need to invest after years of Conservative chaos and mismanagement. Liberal Democrats want to see more direct support which will impact local community businesses. We believe we need swift action specifically to tackle high energy costs, and we continue to call for business rate reform. A new Parliament represents a real opportunity to begin to properly rebuild our trading relationships with Europe. And in speaking with many small business owners, I understand the pressures and limitations that current trade deals with Europe pose to businesses. We must tackle the arduous legislation surrounding importing and exporting goods, which significantly limits the opportunities for small businesses to grow. The Liberal Democrats have a comprehensive plan to rebuild trust and cooperation with Europe, and we understand this to be a crucial aspect of the support which businesses urgently need. We welcome the government's acknowledgement of the need to reform the apprenticeship levy. However, we'd like to see them go further and replace the current scheme with a broader and more flexible skills and training levy. And we hope the government will join us in encouraging the take-up of apprenticeships, particularly for young people, in supporting our calls to guarantee they are paid at least the national minimum wage by scrapping the lower apprentice rate. We understand the broad economic benefits of supporting the development of skilled workers and are optimistic of the advantages that this could bring to business. The recent years of chaos and irresponsible Conservative administration has left a substantial challenge for the new government to tackle. We do not underestimate the work which lies ahead of us, getting the economy back up and running, nurturing an environment which will allow businesses to thrive, and restoring the public services which provide care for people when they need it. My Liberal Democrat colleagues and I will hold the new government to account to ensure that they deliver on the promises which were outlined by His Majesty on Wednesday as we work to rectify the damage done by the Conservatives, rebuild our economy by supporting individual communities, small businesses and urgently investing in health and social care. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I think it is self-evident the dilemma that we face, and that is there are many right honourable and honourable members who want to speak, and we will do all we can to get in as many people as possible, but unfortunately there will now be a 5-minute limit on speeches. The clock will not be used for maiden speeches, but we would ask you to keep an eye on the time. Liam Byrne.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's an absolute honour to be able to speak in this King's Speech debate, and it's an absolute privilege to have heard the Chancellor, the first female Chancellor in our history, deliver such a remarkable opening salvo in this debate. I want to say a word not just about the King's Speech itself, but on the strategy behind the King's Speech. Because when the Chancellor and my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, launched our manifesto, there was a clear ambition at its heart, and that was to ignite a revolution in wealth creation in this country. A revolution in wealth creation, not just for some, but for all. And that strategy was absolutely right, because amongst the worst of our inheritance is the scandal, the moral emergency of the inequality of wealth that now scars our country. Madam Deputy Speaker, you and I could take a walk this afternoon down to a coffee bar called Shot in Mayfair, where they would serve us coffee for £265 a shot. We could go next door to a restaurant called Arugula, where they serve steak for £900 apiece. Some, if they were lucky enough, could book a night at the Raffles Hotel for £25,000. These are extraordinary prices, but not unremarkable in a country that now has the highest level sales of Rolls-Royces, super yachts and private jets. And yet this absurdity of affluence sits alongside a country where we had over 1,000 people die homeless on the last figures, where we have tens of thousands of people who now die from the diseases of poverty, where we have 2.1 million people who can only put food on the table because of the tender mercies of food banks. That is the inequality of wealth that this government has been bequeathed. It is illustrated perhaps best by one figure, that the wealth of the top 1% has grown by 31 times the wealth of everybody else over the last 14 years. That's why my right honourable friend was right to say there has to be a revolution in wealth creation in this country, not just for some, but for all. Now, the measures that my right honourable friend has set out are the right measures. A plan for growth, a plan to devolve economic power out of the paralysis of Westminster and Whitehall down to mayors and local councils, to put alongside that a revolution in planning law and infrastructure law and skills finance. My urge to my friends on the front bench is to maximise the amount of power that is held locally, because it is local people, local leaders who know best how to grow our economy. Now, if we have a growing economy, the key is to then make sure that that growth is fairly shared. That's why the Employment Rights Bill is so important, because, as my right honourable friend said, there hasn't been a growth in living standards for over 14 years. That is why we need to make sure that there is a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. Alongside that, the Draft Equality Act is extremely important, and I would urge my right honourable friend to go further and actually to use the consolidation of pension funds to inaugurate an era of civic capitalism in this country, where we are using the combined £2 trillion worth of pension savings in this country to actually encourage businesses that are good, not businesses that are bad. The kinds of businesses that my right honourable friend revealed when she was a brilliant chair of the Select Committee on Business and Trade, and the kind of scandals which we exposed in the last Parliament in McDonald's, in Asda, in other firms, frankly, who are behaving in a way that would have been reminiscent of Victorian capitalism. Now, once we have begun raising incomes, we must help people build wealth. That is why the changes to the housing market that my right honourable friend proposed are so important. And if we can underpin that, if we can maximise investment into the infrastructure of this country by ensuring that there is a national wealth fund, I would go further. I would actually ask my right honourable friend to look at how we can put together not just the National Wealth Fund, but also the Crown Estate Fund 2, which is set for reform in this bill. We could go a step further and actually review the whole portfolio of investments that are held by the government and indeed by UK government investments. The last government made some pretty strange investments during COVID, including, I understand, shares in Bolton Wanderers, shares in a bespoke boutique whisky company, and it is even said in some newspapers, shares in a strange firm which organises international sex parties called Killing Kittens. So I would say to my friends on the front bench, it is time that we had a doomsday book that consolidated assets in this country. Let's look at what we need and what we don't, and crucially, let's look at how we maximise dividends that go to ordinary working people in this country to help them build wealth for themselves. Madam Deputy Speaker, perhaps I could just conclude with this. On this side of the House, we have long known that the only way that we deliver and maximise freedom and opportunity for people in this country, the only way that we make those freedoms and opportunities real is if there is security. And there is no security without wealth. And that's why the ambition my right honourable friend set out is right. Not simply to build a wealthy democracy, but a democracy of wealth.
Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I start by adding my congratulations to the Chancellor for being the first woman to hold that office in history of our country. At this rate, the Labour Party might even have a female Prime Minister sometime this century. And I'd also like to thank the Shadow Chancellor for everything he did while in office. And in particular, I want to thank the voters of West Worcestershire for returning me back here for the fifth time. And that I was actually one of those who were here in 2010. And it is ironic that I should be following the member for Hodge Hill, because he was the one who left that famous note that said, "I'm sorry, there is no money left." If you want to know what a bad economic legacy looks like, I was here in 2010 when we received it from the party opposite. The deficit was over 10% and rising. Unemployment was over 8%. In fact, inflation was nearly twice its target, and the banking system had just collapsed and had to be bailed out by taxpayers. If you contrast that with the economic legacy of 2024 that the new government inherits, you can see that despite the economic costs of the pandemic and of the energy crisis, that the UK is enjoying the fastest growth in the G7, that unemployment is now half the rate that it was back in 2010, and that inflation is back on target. We have a well-capitalised banking system almost completely out of taxpayers' hands, and wages are now rising faster than inflation, and we're the fourth largest exporter in the world. Don't take my words for it, Madam Deputy Speaker, take the words of the IMF, which in a recently published report said that the economy in the UK is approaching a soft landing, with growth recovering faster than expected, inflation fallen faster than envisaged, and the banking system remains healthy. And that's why I approach the economic measures in the King's speech with a degree of trepidation, because it seems to me they come at a time when the economy was back on track. And while I agree that securing economic growth is a fundamental mission of government, I would personally add the words non-inflationary in front of that mission. And I've looked through this King's speech, and I can't see any measures that magic up economic growth. Growth doesn't just happen because you write it into the King's speech. In my time as chair of the Treasury Select Committee, we had the opportunity to actually have a private session with the IMF. And I think it's very interesting to observe that many of the measures that have been put forward by the government in the King's speech are ones that were in the IMF's prescription for the UK economy. Things like reforming, planning and building on our beloved green belt, they were from the IMF. Strengthening the role of the Office for Budget Responsibility, they were from the IMF. Crowding in private capital on net zero projects via a national wealth fund, they're from the IMF. So what else does the IMF want? Well, colleagues may not be surprised to learn that they also want to see more taxes. They don't quite say it like that. They call it closing tax loopholes or mobilising additional revenues. Some of the ones that we heard in our private session with the IMF are as follows. Setting capital gains tax rates in line with income tax rates. I hope that the front bench will rule that one out. Subjecting the sale of your primary residence to capital gains tax. I hope the front bench will rule that one out. Ending the inheritance tax loopholes like pensions, family businesses and farms. I hope the front bench will rule that one out. Revaluing all of England's homes for council tax, especially those over £320,000 in value. I hope the front bench will rule that one out. The IMF also like the idea of road pricing. I hope the front bench will rule that one out. They want to bring forward the date at which the state pension age increases considerably. So given that these are all tax measures that the IMF recommends, I am sure they are ones that the Chancellor is beginning to contemplate. So when the government responds to today's debate, I hope they will specifically rule those things out, because, Madam Deputy Speaker, the tax rises that the government admits to already are bad enough. The pensioner tax, the tax on education, the regulatory costs galore. Let's hear some specific denials on those other taxes to when they respond to this debate.
Georgia Gould, maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am pleased to speak in a debate with so many strong female representatives, the Honourable Member for West Worcestershire, and I am really honoured to speak in a debate led by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the first female Chancellor of the Exchequer, who has shown today what a force for change she is. And I found it incredibly moving to hear from MPs from across these benches talk with such love and dedication about the places they represent. And it has given this Parliament a deep grounding in the stories of people from every part of the UK. And I feel deeply the trust put in me by the people of Queen's Park and Maida Vale. In speaking here, I stand on the shoulders of some extraordinary women who represented the different parts of Queen's Park and Maida Vale. My honourable friend, the member for Brent East, someone who breaks through glass ceilings and lifts others up behind her. Nothing ever dims her spirit and passion to tackle injustice. And you only need to walk down Harlesden High Street with her to see how she inspires people by her example and sometimes her music. And my honourable friend, the member for Hampstead and Highgate, a formidable campaigner who was in this chamber the day that she was due to give birth because she needed to give her constituents a voice, and who did not stop campaigning until her constituent, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, was safely home with her family. Those who know her will quickly learn that she never, ever gives up, and she is always a voice for the people that she cares about. And Karen Buck, who gave an extraordinary 27 years of service to the residents of Westminster North. I was at a school in my constituency last week where the head said that Karen is the 4th emergency service, always at the end of the phone, ready to help. And I remember going to an elderly people's lunch, and the residents there were like, you know, you can be our MP, you're very nice. Just make sure that Karen comes to our residents' meeting in July. The wonderful team at the House Library sent me Karen's maiden speech, and it was no surprise to me that it was a passionate call to action on the housing conditions of her constituents. And this passion has not dimmed for a second and can be heard in every line of her 37 interventions in the Renters Reform Bill over 25 years later. She has shown that somebody with community running through their veins can move mountains. And I will work every day to live up to the women that came before me, including Madam Deputy Speaker and her sister Baroness McDonough, who showed both of them such amazing dedicated service and themselves never give up on fighting for their constituents and the people of this country. Queen's Park and Maida Vale is a place that means a huge amount to me. My great-grandfather came over to the UK when he was a teenager, fleeing the poverty and pogroms of Lithuania, and worked his way up to open a shop on Kilburn High Road. My family have lived and worked in the area ever since. Growing up in the heart of London, attending Horfield Primary School and seeing how many children were cut out of the opportunities on their doorstep has driven me ever since. And the need we're seeing now is worse than ever. My inbox, my surgeries are full of people who are facing homelessness crisis, skipping meals to feed their families, all in walking distance of this chamber. And Queen's Park and Maida Vale is a place with huge need, but it's also a place with huge heart. It's a place that has welcomed not just my family, but families from so many different backgrounds. We're home to the Bangladeshi Catering Association, the Lauderdale Road Synagogue, the UK Albanian Muslim Community and Cultural Centre, Harlesden, the unofficial capital of reggae and the starting point of so many iconic artists and producers. And Kilburn, a centre of creativity with a claim to be the birthplace of cinema, and the amazing diverse community of Church Street. We're a community that's rich in spirit and dynamism. In 1879, Queen's Park was chosen to host the Royal Agricultural Show. It's like the Victorian equivalent of the Olympics. And it was a very British affair. It rained most of the time, but ordinary people campaigned to preserve the open space, and it's still a thriving park today. And down the road, Walterton and Elgin Community Homes is a shining example of community leadership. We also have the country's only urban parish council. And Queen's Park is the birthplace of the pride of West London, Queen's Park Rangers Football Club. And I can tell you that being a QPR fan is almost as good as this chamber to get to know the communities of the UK. Rainy days in Cardiff, Preston, Southend, Tranmere, embracing again and again the triumph of hope over experience. And I've always been an optimist, and despite 14 tough years in local government, including 7 as Camden Council leader, I've never lost hope, because every day I can see the power of communities. I was elected as a councillor in 2010, and at events when people used to say to me, "What do you do?" I'd proudly say to them, "I'm a councillor," and they'd say, "That's so wonderful, you do such wonderful work as a therapist." And I'd have to say, no, not that kind of councillor. I'm a Labour Party councillor, and you could see them either swiftly go and get a drink or talk to me about dog mess. And street cleaning and rubbish collection are essential services that councils deliver. My honourable friend, the member for Birmingham Erdington, once introduced me as the person that makes sure Keir Starmer's bins are collected. But we often forget how much more local government is. I see this every day watching the work of Brent and Westminster, 2 brilliant Labour councils in my constituency. Councils are lifelines for communities. They provide care for children and adults who most need support. They're leaders of place, bringing services and people together to make change. I've seen local government staff go above and beyond time and time again, fueled by love and dedication, because there was no one else there, whether that's working with communities to deliver food during COVID or to support Afghan evacuees. When things have been hard, they've held together our communities, finding unity in difference. The gracious speech sets out bold new proposals in the English Devolution Bill to unlock the energy and creativity of communities. It sets out bills to fulfil the long-held campaign of Karen Bucks to end no-fault evictions and reform the leasehold system. And the proposals will support the people of Queen's Park and Maida Vale, who come out every day to build their community. The youth workers, the community gardeners, the North Paddington Food Bank that wish they didn't have to exist, people putting hope into action because they believe that things can change. And I know as I sit in this chamber, I will have their voices and stories with me, but also the stories I've heard from honourable members across the UK. We all have that in common, the privilege and the responsibility of bringing the voices of our community to this place. We may debate and disagree, but I hope to always listen and learn, and remember that we are being entrusted to weave those stories, hopes and ambitions together for a national vision for this country, one that governs for all and leaves no one behind.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to congratulate the Honourable Lady the Member for Queen's Park and Maida Vale on a simply superb speech. It's been made in the best traditions of the House. She's done her constituents pride, and I know that she brings huge amounts of expertise and commitment to this House. I wish her all the best going forward. Madam Deputy Speaker, I also want to put on record my thanks to the good people of Fareham Waterlooville for sending me back to Parliament. We had a fantastically energetic, let's put it that way, campaign, a very hard-fought campaign, and I'm very honoured and humbled to have the privilege to speak on their behalf in this chamber. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, there was one thing that struck me in the King's speech. It wasn't the long list of policies that will no doubt damage our economy. It wasn't the vague promises that will not survive contact with reality. No, Madam Deputy Speaker, for me, the thing that was conspicuous by its absence was the total failure of the Labour government to deal with child poverty and scrap the two-child benefit cap on welfare. Yes, you heard that right. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am rising.
Can I ask that we show respect and listen to the member's speech?
A bit of surprise I detect on the benches opposite, but I am indeed rising to speak on behalf of scrapping the cap. Now, in the grand tapestry of British politics, where the warp and weft of policy and principle interlace, it isn't often that you will find a Conservative MP find threads of agreement with friends across the aisle. But here we are, discussing a proposal backed by Labour MPs, led by the Honourable Member, the Member for Liverpool Riverside, backed by the Lib Dems, the SNP, and many opposition parties. And it's one with which I agree, because it speaks to my profound sense of justice and, dare I say, compassion. And I'm rising today to talk about why, as Conservatives, we can and should back scrapping the cap. Now, let's just rewrite history, because there's been a lot of nonsense from the Labour front bench about the situation that we inherited in 2010. To put simply, we inherited no less than an economic catastrophe, and we worked hard to retrieve that situation. The deficit stood at 10% in 2010. We've got that down to 1.9%. Public sector net borrowing was at 10%. We've got that down to 3%. We were in a deep recession, and we now have the fastest growing economy in the G7. So we had to make incredibly difficult decisions back in 2010 to reduce our welfare bill. But it remains clear to me that with those welfare reforms, spearheaded by my right honourable friend, the member for Woodford Green and Chingford, where we overhauled an overly complex bureaucratic system and have helped millions of people get back into work. 4 million people are now in work compared to 2010. The unemployment rate is down to 4.4%, almost half of what it was in 2010. We can make changes to some of the decisions that we made back then. And it's clear to me from my work with vulnerable families in Fareham that the cap isn't working. It's pushing more children and families into relative poverty. It's causing them to use more food banks. And that's why there are 3 good reasons for scrapping the cap.
Thanks very much for giving way. I wonder if the Honourable Lady might say to the House, first of all, who introduced the cap and why, and which way that the Honourable Lady voted when it went through this House.
Yes, well, I just set out the parlous economic situation forced us to make very difficult and indeed impossible choices. But thanks to the improved economics, thanks to the improvements brought about by universal credit, I believe it is now time to put child poverty first and scrap the cap. And there are three big reasons why we can support this as Conservatives. First of all, it's affordable. For about £1.7 billion, i.e. 0.14% of total government spending, we could quickly bring about 300,000 children out of poverty. As I say, with the improved situation, I believe that is the fair and right thing to do. Secondly, the reason why it was introduced in the first place, i.e. to disincentivise poorer families from having more children, has not necessarily worked. The number of children born has remained relatively